A WWE star's finishing move is obviously an important part of their act, and a good finisher should tick a few different boxes, from matching the star's character to their ability to hit it on anyone regardless of their size. It should also probably not suck donkey balls. But I guess these guys and gals, despite being great wrestlers, didn't get the memo, because donkey balls were well and truly sucked with their finisher choices. I'm Sam Driver from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 great WWE wrestlers who had terrible finishers. Join us! Number 10. Chris Jericho's breakdown. Chris Jericho has had no shortage of good to great finishers throughout his career. Whether he was making people tap out with the Lion Tamer or Walls of Jericho, or dazzling crowds with the Lion Salt, Y2J's wins typically arrived in an exciting way. Hell, even the Code Breaker, which he unearthed during his second WWE stint, was an innovative addition to his repertoire. But Jericho, a man noted for his ability to reinvent himself, has also experimented with what turned out to be duds. The step-up enziguri he used for a minute was so-so, while the multiple powerbomb he used during his early WWE days was a cool idea in theory, but looked contrived in practice. They were both miles better than the breakdown, however. The breakdown was a full Nelson falling thing that would be later utilized by The Miz as the skull-crushing finale. When Jericho started doing it during his ascent to the main event in late 2001, he either didn't know how to execute it properly, or his opponents didn't know how to take it properly, or both, because it almost never looked good. Jericho later noted that he scrapped the move as he could never get the science down right, and he just knew it wasn't working. Number 9. Mick Foley's double arm DDT. It seems arbitrary to complain about the finisher of a performer who gave so much every time he stepped through the curtain, but the match ender Mick Foley chose, whether he was wrestling as Mankind, Dude Love, or Cactus Jack, was among the most unimpressive things he did in the squared circle. Having previously used a pulling pile driver and a running elbow off the ring apron to the floor, Foley adopted the double arm DDT when he joined WWE to go along with the mandible claw. While the claw got over and proved to be an effective finisher, the double arm DDT just looked like another move in his arsenal and rarely produced the sort of reaction you'd expect from a finisher for such a big star. The quality would also vary wildly depending on who was taking it. Obviously, Foley would figure out how to get a ridiculous response by putting Mr. Socko over his hand before delivering the mandible claw, but for a while there, he was racking up W's with this mediocre move. Years later, Dean Ambrose would use the double arm DDT, which he dubbed Dirty Deeds. A nice tribute to the hardcore legend, perhaps, but the move still wasn't any good as a finisher. Number 8. Trish Stratus's Stratusfaction. Under the watchful eye of Fit Finlay and with talented pros like Molly, Holly, Jacqueline, and Jazz to work with, Trish Stratus came on leaps and bounds as an in-ring performer when she decided to transition from being a manager to a wrestler proper. Trish's progression was heartening to witness, as you could clearly track her improvements as the weeks, months, and years went by. One thing that never got better, mind, was her finisher. Early on, Stratus would use a standard running bulldog to put her opponents away, or would occasionally use a diving bulldog off the second rope. Sticking with the bulldog but adding a new touch, Trish eventually settled on the Stratusfaction. The Stratusfaction saw her deliver the bulldog, but only after jumping from the canvas to the top rope and then turning toward the center of the ring. It was a neat idea in theory, perhaps, but in execution, it just looked more than a little awkward, particularly because it was so clear that the move could only be pulled off with the complete cooperation of her opponent. The chick kick had no such issues, but was still a bit weak as a finisher, especially when compared to stuff like Lita's Moonsault or Victoria's Widow's Peak. Number 7. Mark Henry's World's Strongest Slam. It seems trite to complain about the finishing move of a man who could probably put me in my grave with a mean stare, but for a specimen as physically impressive as Mark Henry, the World's Strongest Slam seemed, ironically, rather weak. Believability was never going to be a problem with Henry, who used a Canadian backbreaker and bear hug during the early days of his WWE career. He experimented with a couple of other things here and there, but never really settled on anything until he started getting more of a sustained push. That was when he decided on using the World's Strongest Slam, which saw him pick up his opponent horizontally and slam them down onto their back while he dropped to his knees. Again, believability wasn't an issue, as someone with the size and power of Mark Henry slamming you down like that that looks like it would hurt. But as a finisher, it always just looked a bit too ordinary for someone so exceptional. Perhaps if he'd followed it up with the world's strongest splash or used Davey Boy Smith's old running power slam, he would have gotten over as even more of a monster. Number 6. Shelton Benjamin's Exploder Suplex. WWE knew they had a gifted athlete in Shelton Benjamin when the former University of Minnesota amateur standout was stationed in Feeder Farm, Ohio Valley Wrestling, where he would reportedly walk the entire length of the top rope without losing his balance. Brought up to the main roster in a tag team with Charlie Haas, Shelton got to show off his athleticism during his Team Angle World's Greatest Tag Team days, but was really able to flourish after he was drafted from SmackDown to Raw and went solo. Benjamin had plenty of killer moves in his offensive arsenal, including a dragon whip and springboard clothesline, which is why it's so peculiar that he chose a bog-standard exploder / T-bone suplex as his finisher. It's a nice looking move and all, but I'm pretty sure the gold standard had a lot more interesting suplexes in his back pocket. Yes, he could hit it on anyone, which is key for a finisher, as we said, but sometimes the person taking it made the move look like little more than a scoop slam. And he eventually switched to the pay dirt, a type of jumping flatliner, which was an improvement almost by default. Number 5. William Regal's Knee Trembler. A true student of the game who combined smash-mouth style with sumptuous technical wrestling, William Regal had many ways to hurt and ultimately beat his opponents. But when it came to the finishers he employed throughout his WWE career, it certainly was a mixed bag. The Regalplex, a variation on the bridging back suplex, and the Regal Stretch, a modified STF, were both formidable. But the Regal Cutter, a sort of arm trap neckbreaker, didn't get over quite so strong. The power of the punch, meanwhile, worked like gangbusters, but he obviously couldn't use it as a babyface. So this is where the Knee Trembler came in. The Knee Trembler was quite simply a running knee to the temple delivered to an opponent who was bent over at a 45-degree angle, which might be the sort of thing that would end a real fight, but WWE isn't the UFC, and such a simple strike never looked like much even when it was delivered by a hard nut like Regal. Given that Sir William has forgotten more wrestling moves than most people will ever know, it's curious that this is the one he landed on as his favored weapon. Number 4. Scott Steiner's Flatliner. Look, pretty much everything about Scott Steiner's singles WWE run was cursed, with highlights being few and far between. The big bad booty daddy didn't come close to recapturing the magic of his WCW days and was plagued by injuries, which resulted in bad matches to go along with mostly substandard, often shocking booking. Steiner had long been noted for his ability to create spectacular moves, having busted out a proto version of the 450 splash in his early days before popularizing the Frankensteiner and unleashing the unholy terror that was the Steiner screwdriver on the world. As his body began to wear down, however, Scott put these and other potential finishers aside in favor of the Steiner recliner, which was his spin on the old camel clutch. Not exactly as impressive from a physical standpoint perhaps, but the recliner got over and became synonymous with the genetic freak. Yet, for whatever reason, during his ill-fated WWE run, Steiner eschewed his recliner in favor of the flatliner, a very basic move, sort of like Edge's old downward spiral, albeit lazier. It was almost like he'd accepted being a mid-carder by using a mid-carder's finisher. Number 3. The Ultimate Warrior's Running Splash. Though Jim Hellwig might have had the same actual wrestling ability of your average bear, and definitely not a working bear like Terrible Ted, if you were to judge him based on appearance alone, you would assume he could tear just about anybody's head off. Possessing one of the industry's greatest physiques, the Ultimate Warrior looked every bit like a comic book character come to life, and to WWE's young audience, that meant he must be the strongest and best, right? Yet for such a big star, Warrior had such a tame finishing move. I mean, I'm not going to pretend that a 280-pound muscle monster jumping up in the air and splashing you wouldn't knock the wind out of your sails in real life, but in the context of a WWE match, it was just hard to believe it would see off the behemoths Warrior was beating with it, whether it was preceded by a gorilla press slam or a diving shoulder tackle. Yes, you could argue that it was the end of a sequence of moves that he'd usually do for the finish, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Warrior's belly flop was, well, a flop. Number 2. Kerry Von Erich's Tornado Punch. Scott Steiner, Ultimate Warrior, and now Kerry Von Erich? What is this? The Big Juicy Bastard Parade? Not that I'm complaining, of course, because big juicy bastards are exactly what this business is all about. Or at least was about until it went all woke with its drug testing. Kerry was one hell of a performer in his day, and like every other member of the Von Erich family, used the Iron Claw. The simplest of moves, but one that was over wherever he went. By the time Kerry made it to WWE as the Texas Tornado, he may have been struggling physically and with certain things in his personal life, but he still had an amazing look, and he still had the Iron Claw. But Kerry didn't use the claw as much in WWE, and it eventually sort of became more of a signature move. It was often followed by the discus tornado punch instead. He'd been a record-breaking discus thrower in his youth, and even trained for the 1980 Olympics, but those bona fides didn't make his new finisher any good. Doing a little twirl, even after jumping off the ropes, didn't do anything to make his punch appear any deadlier, and it only ever looked really good when Mr. Perfect sold it with his own spin. And number 1, Becky Lynch's Manhandle Slam. It took her a little while to get there, but once Becky Lynch put it all together and got accidentally punched full force in the face by Nia Jax, she became not just the biggest star in WWE's women's division, but arguably the biggest star in the company itself. The man had the look, the attitude, the mic skills, and the moves of a big-time player. Well, most of the moves anyway, because one of her finisher choices was, well, it certainly was a choice. Her favored submission hold, the disarm her, was perfectly serviceable and believable, but Becky obviously needed a second option for matches she was gonna win via pinfall. The Manhandle Slam is a type of pump handle uranagi that really doesn't suit Lynch, who simply doesn't have the size to make the move look devastating. It was also quite clearly awkward for her opponents to take, and more often than not, it looked sloppy in execution. Removing the pump handle aspect got rid of some of the awkwardness, but Big Time Bex could still do with a suitably big time finisher. I hear the atomic leg drop is up for grabs, sister brother.